Welcome everybody. This is session number 9. Today we talk about is the ego an illusion? So Professor Krishna, if you may please go ahead. Thank you. Sir, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we have seen so far that the violence that we see in society is a projection of the violence that is there in our consciousness, individual consciousness. And the violence that is there in our consciousness is a product of the ego process that the human consciousness is prone to. So it's important for us to investigate what this ego is, not just accept what we have read from Krishna ji. As we said earlier, unless we investigate it, we don't grow in our own understanding, at least not deeply. So that is the purpose of this talk, that we will investigate what this ego is, and in particular, whether it is a part of nature, a reality, or it is simply a construct of our own thoughts and our mind, and arises from the way we approach life. The reason it's important to make this distinction is because if it is part of nature, like the various organs in our body, then you cannot eliminate it. It's not created by your thinking, therefore you cannot eliminate it either. Then the only question would be, what is our best relationship with it? Like, for example, sexuality, it is there. Nature has put it into us, our body and consciousness. So we can only ask, what is the right place of sexuality in our life? We can't eliminate it, or at least should not, because if you try to do that, it creates other problems. But if it is simply a construct of our own thoughts, a result of some choices or identification or belief, not really a fact of nature, then it is possible to free ourselves of it. Now you see a lot of books written about self-improvement. They are all books that assume that the ego is there. There is no way of getting rid of it. And therefore, one can only talk about improvement along with the ego. Also, there is management of the ego. That means you assume that all other people are also egoistic. So you have Dale Carnegie's books saying how to win friends and influence people. Sort of you make your way to success in society by oiling your way in this cobweb of egos. So you smile at everyone, you compliment everyone and all that kind of thing, so that people begin to like you. And then they are nice to you, and that leads to benefits that you get. All that is still an ego process. Krishnamurti is not interested in that. He is talking about the dissolution of the ego, which is a very different thing. It's a religious inquiry, what we are engaging in. not an inquiry into self-improvement. I hope that distinction is clear. Now that's only possible if the ego is an illusion, which means just a construct of our own thoughts and assumption, which we have not questioned. And therefore we take it as a reality. That's what we mean by illusion. So let's begin with observation. Is there ego anywhere in the universe? We have seen in the scientific and religious quest, the talk on that there is a tremendous cosmic order governed by definite laws which science determines, which is operating in nature. And all natural phenomena proceed according to those laws as part of that order. Sometimes that order is helpful to us, and sometimes it's destructive. So for example, now the rainy season will come as part of that order, and if it doesn't rain too much, it will be beneficial to us. And when it doesn't rain at all, then it creates a crisis for human beings. But that's not disorder, because nature is still following the laws. I mean, earthquakes come, they are destructive for us. Cyclones come, they are destructive for us. But there is no intention on the part of nature to destroy, nor is there an intention to help. So there is no ego in nature, the ego arising from intention. It is human beings who kill wantonly, intentionally, plan for it, and so on. That is the ego. That's the result of the ego. So the definition of order is not that which suits us, and disorder as that which opposes us. Once that is clear, then the next question is, how does this ego form? Because almost every human being has it, at least in childhood, unless you can outgrow it later on. Now the child is born, it's part of nature. And we said in nature there is no ego, so there is no ego in the child. It has all the senses, it has the instincts, but there is no intentionality in the child. It cries, nature dictates. When it cries, it smiles. When nature dictates, when it smiles. It is not yet having psychological pleasure and psychological pain. So there is this instinct also in animals of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It's there in us too. But in us human beings, it also extends to psychological pleasure and psychological pain. And that's what is the complication. Psychological pleasure is flattery, praise, and psychological pain is insult or criticism. We don't like it. So like and dislike arise, which is a psychological process, as distinct from the physical process of wanting to eat sweets and avoid bitter food and so on. That's part of instinct. So it's this psychological part which is responsible for the ego process. The question is, how does it develop and can we get out of it? Now the child, a human child, is extremely dependent. Unlike the young one of an animal, which becomes independent in 3 to 6 months, doesn't need its parents. It manages its life on its own. But the human child is dependent for something like 15, 20 years, because there is not only the development of the body, which takes also a long time, but also the development of consciousness, the psyche. So he becomes an independent adult only by the time he reaches the age of 20 or 21 or so, and he can manage his life. Till then, he is extremely dependent on his parents and clings to them, does whatever they say, is attached to them, feels secure in that home atmosphere, and clings to it. And in a way, it is necessary for survival, because the child didn't have that. He would just venture out on the road and, not knowing how to manage traffic, might get killed. So this attachment to the family, to his home, seems to be a very natural thing which develops in every human being. And that attachment or dependence is the ego. It extends further into likes and dislikes, which you pick up from your parents in the family, what you like, you don't like, certain moral things and immoral things, all that kind of conditioning also comes in. And then one is attached to that conditioning. So the feeling of my home, my religion, my culture, my people develops. And that is what we call the ego. Identification with the me and the mind. And then the mind begins to work mainly for security of the me and the mind, the profits for the me and the mind, and the progress of the me and the mind. And that divides you from others, and so on. Because they have invested in their security and their progress in their me and the mind. So, in a way, it's a natural process in the human being. That's what I feel. That's not what Krishnaji has said, by the way. But we are investigating. So we don't follow everything that Krishnaji has said. We are questioning. That's how it forms. Question now is, are we permanently trapped in that state? Or can we come out of it? It may be necessary in the beginning for the child, but later on we have seen that it creates division, it produces disorder in our own life, in also society. So seeing all that, can we outgrow it? Just as a baby has to be fed and needs to cling to the mother's breast for that. But eventually we wean the child away from the breast so that he can have milk independently, separately. So can we wean ourselves away from this ego state once we are grown up? Otherwise, if you say that's not possible, then the whole of life is colored by this ego process, which is what we are experiencing, both in our life and in the life of people around us and also society. We have gone into it in great detail in previous lectures, so I won't dwell on it. And Krishnaji is saying You can come out of it. But you have to learn. You have to ask questions. You have to observe and see the danger of belonging to this prison of conditioning and being attached to it, and therefore dividing yourself from others who are differently conditioned. Your self-interest clashes with the self-interest of your neighbor or other colleagues, and that creates conflict and division. Tomorrow we will go into this whole process of how conflict arises in life and whether it's possible to be free of conflict. But the source of that lies in this ego. Now, there is no ego in nature, and we are also products of nature. So obviously, it's something that develops after birth and is a product of our own thinking and our own conditioning, which is subsequent to birth. It may be natural in the sense it's very common. Everybody goes through this. But that doesn't mean that it's part of nature. Krishnaji used to point to learning from nature, from trees. He said, look at a tree. Its strongest part are the roots and the trunk, and they support the weakest part, which is the tiny leaf on the top. Learn from that. We think that the strong and the rich need to dominate and exploit. But in nature, they support the weak. So learn to do that. That would be the right relationship towards power. There is also a verse in the Hindi literature from an old ancient poet called Surdas, who said, "Oh man, learn from the trees. When somebody cuts a branch, they don't retaliate. When someone throws a stone at them, they yield fruit in return. They take the hot sun on their head and offer shade to the traveler without asking whether he deserves it. Oh man, learn from the trees." What they're saying is that there is no ego there. Therefore, they are totally non-violent. And the problem with a human being is that he is violent because there is ego in him. And that ego has developed subsequent to birth through all this attachment to the me and the mine. So Krishnaji is saying, we all need to engage in this inquiry of self-knowledge to come out of that ego state. The conditioning in itself is not the ego. It's actually sitting there in your memory, the knowledge that you have, the food that you like, and so on, the ideas that you grow up with in your family. But do you have to necessarily accept all, identify with it? Or can you hold it lightly, question it, drop what is false, what is hurtful, what is damaging, and retain only that which is healthy, not leading to any crisis in relationship? That is the process of self-knowledge. And he is saying everyone needs to engage in that, because otherwise Violence is inevitable in our consciousness and therefore in society. And you cannot bring about any fundamental transformation in society without bringing about a transformation in human consciousness. Because it's the consciousness that projects into relationships. And it's millions of such relationships that constitute society. Now, the ego seems beneficial at first sight because it's profitable. When you look only this far, it is profitable both physically, materially, and psychologically. Because when you are with a group of friends and colleagues with a sense of belonging, you feel secure among them. You feel that they will protect you and so on. You belong to a community, gives you a feeling of protection. It's only when you see with a long vision that you will see that it creates division and therefore really creates insecurity. So the feeling of being secure is really an illusion. It's not a fact. It is being perceived as security because you're not looking far enough. And that far vision is wisdom. And this narrow vision is the ego. So that's the big illusion which the ego creates. The ego creates the illusion that working for myself and working in self-interest is in my self-interest. It's not. That's the central illusion of whole of humanity, that it thinks that acting out of self-interest is in its self-interest. It is not. It is creating the greatest havoc in one's personal life and also in one's social life. But that is not perceived. And therefore this illusion continues. And all the consequences we are seeing every day, both in our personal life and also in society. So Krishnaji wanted to change education. Education not only what transpires in the classroom between the teacher and the student, because you can't teach self-knowledge like a course. But you can create this inquiry, which we are creating in this course, in the course of education. Plant these questions in the mind of the child. Don't plant the answers. He will find his own answers. And he'll come to the wisdom that he is capable of coming to. The aim of this inquiry or of self-knowledge is not to become, not nirvana or to become completely free. When you put that as an aim, this inquiry itself turns into an ego process. Because the ego is always working for achievement, wanting to become something in the future. And that's an illusion. Because we said that earlier, we have seen that real change is a byproduct of understanding and not of your effort to become and to achieve. And that kind of ambitious aim to achieve something is a process of desire. And when your desire is blocked, you will sweep the obstruction aside, which is what creates violence. So the ambitious man is necessarily violent. And we are promoting ambition through education. So he talked of a totally different kind of education in which the child grows up with sensitivity. Sensitivity meaning love, compassion, brotherhood, cooperation, friendship, true friendship. Not all these ego processes. So all Krishnamurti schools were built in places of great natural beauty. They had people, I mean teachers and students and attendants and so on, workers. They had lots of trees and birds and animals. And the life in that school was what was educating the child. So it's like a pilot plant project. If in that small 500 people society, which is a microcosm of the real society, if you can attain a totally different atmosphere in which there is love and compassion and no casteism, no religious bigotry, and so on, then the child will grow up very differently with a new mind, with a global mind, not a parochial local mind. And you plant also this inquiry of self-knowledge in his mind, just as we take a lot of pains to plant the scientific inquiry or the mathematical inquiry into the child. You have to take pains to put this inquiry and point out to him that this is an inquiry that cannot be solved just intellectually, that you have to observe and find your way and your own answers, which is the religious quest. So you introduce both the religious quest and the scientific quest. And that's possible because when you give the right meaning to religion and science, there is no contradiction, which is what we have seen before. So you will have a human being who is knowledgeable, who learns techniques and subjects because he is interested. Because Krishna said the ego comes in the approach to life. Let's examine that. It's not in the activity. It's not that your wife creates the ego or your property creates the ego. No. You approach your wife or your property egoistically. The ego is inside you. It's not out there in the object or in the activity. So everything can be done egoistically, and the same thing can be done non-egoistically with love. Whether it is work of science, whether it is studies, whether it is games, everything can be done non-egoistically, and the same thing can be done egoistically. So the ego is merely coming from our approach. Let us examine that with an example. Consider a game of whatever, tennis or football or whatever it is. You are playing against your friend. If you give tremendous importance to the result of the game and you are hung up on winning, the whole game becomes egoistic. Then, if your friend falls down, you feel happy because you will win. If there is a foul which the umpire didn't notice, you are happy because you are gaining a point wrongfully. And you cheat. And you are very frustrated if you lose at the end of the game. So there are a lot of negative emotions which arise in playing the game when you give importance not to the joy of playing, but to the result, to the success of winning, which is what is happening in the world. You can see that in Olympics and so on. You can see this at the highest level. And the opponent appears to be like a rival, temporarily almost like an enemy. But suppose I don't approach the game like that. I play the game for the love of it. I enjoy playing the game. And I want to play my best to excel because that's the right thing to do. And your friend wins. What is there to be sorrowful? You have to stay with that question. Since you were not aiming at winning, you have played, you have enjoyed the game. And he won because he was a better player. So you go and compliment him. You say, I enjoyed it. I'd like to play more with you. I would like to learn from you. None of the negative emotions enter into the game. So if a game can be played non-egoistically, and the same game can be played egoistically, well, isn't whole of life also a game? Can it not be lived egoistically or lived non-egoistically? You can be doing exactly what you are doing, but not for the sake of success, for a result, for achievement, but for the joy that is innate to that activity. Which means you have to begin rightly. You have to enter a profession which you really love, enjoy. Unfortunately, that's not what we are teaching in education. We are teaching the children to pick up that profession which will give the maximum job and money and security, economic security. We'll discuss all this when we come to right education next week. But I have just pointed out that the ego arises from our approach. And the other day I had given the example of a teacher who is criticized by his student. And if he is egoistic, how he responds to it. And if he is not egoistic and takes it as an input of information, then he learns from it and improves his teaching. So the ego is something that is coming from our approach to life. Now it's there. So can you watch it? Can you watch it with a learning mind, an inquiring mind? And you will yourself discover that that kind of approach is really not beneficial. It doesn't lead to happiness or peace or prosperity. That it leads to more and more conflict and division and divorces and all these negative things that we are seeing in society. If you perceive that for yourself, why would you approach egoistic? After all, you don't put your finger in fire. It is so clear that it's damaging. You do it here because it's not clear. And why is it not clear? It's not clear because you have not really lived with that question for a long time and watched for a long time. You simply accepted some conclusions from society and some idea of success from society. So because whole of society is looking at education in that way, education is become like a factory in which the raw material is the child. It comes in at 6 years of age, and you fashion him, mold him for 14 years, and out comes an engineer and a doctor and a social worker and artist, and he does the work for you in society. And that's the aim of education. Not concerned whether that man is going to be happy, what kind of marriage will he have, how does he relate to nature, is he creative, or is he working painstakingly, worrying all the time and so on. unhappy human being. Education is not concerned about that. So in a way, we don't love our children. If you loved your child, you would care for his happiness, not just for his career and for his earning the money. That's just one part of life. That's what Krishnaji is pointing out. And I think I sent you a dialogue which Krishnaji had with 4 students in Benares, university students, where he makes this clear that the education that we are giving at present is extremely defective. And it creates a lopsided development of a human being. Extremely proficient and knowledgeable in one particular direction, and extremely ignorant in all other directions. So that's what the ego does. And therefore, the ego is a great danger in our life. But in order to see that for a fact, and not as an idea, as a noble idea, because noble ideas, you can't put them into practice. We have seen that already. Virtue cannot be practiced. So its real change can come only when you perceive the danger of the ego as real as the danger of fire or of a precipice. Then it will break. Because not your intelligence. Nature has put an intelligence into our system which doesn't allow us to court danger. But because you don't see the danger, you are tempted. You are tempted because it seems profitable to approach egoistically. So since it is coming from one's own approach, by realizing this, the approach can change. And that means that you no longer approach life in that egoistic way. Otherwise, cooperation breaks down, cooperation between husband and wife breaks down, cooperation between brothers breaks down, cooperation in the workplace breaks down, because every difference of opinion, every difference of belief and identification becomes a chasm which is not crossable. So it has very serious consequences. But we think that is part of life because everybody is going through this and it seems normal. And Krishnaji is saying, no, it's just a common illusion of all of humanity. We have lots of common illusions like that, which we don't question because it seems normal. And it seems normal because everybody is having that problem. And he's saying, no, don't go by statistics, don't go by what everybody thinks. Think out for yourself, find out what is the truth. That's what this inquiry is about. And when you do that quite impartially, then you will see that the ego is an illusion and you can drop it. So I'll end it here and maybe we can have discussion.
Thank you, sir. So Gayatri ji had this comment first that is it ego a biological and psychological defense mechanism? Is it essential? Otherwise, there is a danger of becoming insane.
As I pointed out, in childhood, it is necessary because that protection is necessary. But when you grow up, if you still remain in that state, then it creates the kind of life that we are seeing around us. And if you feel that that life is not normal, the way our society is going on, not normal, then you have to change it. And in order to change it, your own approach to life has to change. Now you can't change it willfully. You cannot decide on these things. We discussed that earlier, that our decision operates only in very superficial matters. You can decide what to wear, which house to live in, which car to buy, and so on. But you can't decide to be peaceful. You can't decide to love. You can't decide to perceive beauty. The greatest things in life are those which you can't decide upon. But they can be had. They are a byproduct of understanding, which is wisdom. And the key to wisdom is self-knowledge, which is what we are right now attempting to engage in. It's an inquiry to understand oneself deeply and one's relationships to the world, to everything, to nature, to ideas, to knowledge, to colleagues, to everything. Without that, there is no possibility of either any serious reform in society. We have discussed that, isn't it? That you can choose between one set of problems and another set of problems, but you won't be free from problems because the ego itself is a problem, is a creator of illusions, and those illusions create the disorder.
So Sumitra ji finds that it is profound when you mention change is the byproduct of understanding. She's asking, how then do children grow? Would you say that the life is inherently a clarifying process, compassionate at core?
No, not automatically. Automatically, it leads to a lot of conditioning, doesn't it? When you don't inquire and don't raise these questions, the normal state is the ego state in which you come about. And one can see why. Because there is this instinct of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. So you're all the time seeking not only physical pleasure and material pleasure, but also psychological pleasure. I like this, I don't like this. Becomes the important thing to pursue, like and avoid dislike. When you approach life like that, you are going to divide people into friends whom you like and those whom you don't like, who become enemies. So division is inevitable when you approach life like that from the point of view of your own pleasure and benefit. That's a very short-sighted way of looking at it. I quoted Khalil Gibran on friendship. A true friend doesn't come seeking you for any benefit. He comes just to share with you, share whatever his life is. The other problem with the ego is that you are afraid of being insulted, of being criticized. So fear comes as one of the products of that. And if we look at what insult is, you will find that you have a self-image, a reputation which you have built, which may not be true, but you like it because when people believe that reputation, they are very helpful, they are very admiring, and it becomes very pleasant to you. But it's false. Because when somebody criticizes you, you don't learn from that criticism. You feel hurt. You feel insulted because your reputation is what you want to maintain. And so it becomes so hypocritical. You're not really seeking truth. You are seeking praise, benefit, reputation, and you are hiding behind that. The real you are not revealing to your friend. So Krishnaji made an interesting statement which we should stay with and look at very carefully. He said, sir, you don't have any relationship with me because you have an image about me. But I have a relationship with you because I don't have any image. Those false images are illusions. Your reputation is a false image. It has been built by other people who see one part of you, don't know you wholly, and therefore admire you, praise you. So Krishnaji insisted that when he was introduced before a talk, it should just be factual. No praise, saying he's a great man, this, that, and the other, because that builds this image which is false. They say all kinds of false things about you, and because they are your hosts, you can't oppose them at that time publicly. So completely avoided. He said, no introduction. I'll just come there, give my talk, and go. He was so particular about not building an image about himself. And he explained how these images interfere in the relationship. You don't really have a relationship with your wife, but you have a relationship with the image you have of your wife. And she has a relationship about the image she has of you. Those images are unreal things. They are just opinions we have of each other based on some aspects. They are not the truth about the other person. So he said there are two things. One is not to feel insulted, which means also not to feel flattered. If a person praises you, you see through it that it's not true, you drop it. A person criticizes you, you listen to it, don't react, don't feel insulted, but watch whether there is some truth in it. And if there is, you act on that truth and change yourself. And if it is not, just drop it. Where is the hurt coming from? They have not hit you. It's not a biological pain. So you have to deeply question this. Where does the hurt come from when somebody criticizes me? And why do I want that people should praise me and not criticize me? All these are deep questions to live with, because they are the sign that the ego is operating within us. So it's a very profound inquiry. I agree with you. Not simple.
Thank you, sir. Sir Kanchanji she has a comment about quest for education, which is non-institutionalized. She is asking, can schools and organizational setup initiate such an inquiry? And also, can the child be taught to stay unconditioned in spite of the inevitable conditionings?
Yeah, we'll go into this next week when we talk about education, because it's a very vast subject. It's not so easy. I have been principal of a Krishnamurti school for 16 years. And I would like to frankly talk to you about the difficulties of creating such an education. It is not at all easy, because where do you get the teachers from? And they come with their conditioning. They have grown up in society. They have been educated with reward and punishment and with comparison and all that. They bring all that with them. You can talk to them about all this, but it doesn't become a reality for them. They hold it like a philosophy of the school to be practiced. It's not a philosophy that can be practiced. And therefore, there are a lot of difficulties in materializing the vision. The vision first has to be clear. What kind of education you want to give. And we will discuss that in that last talk in detail, and also go into all the difficulties of bringing that vision to reality on a campus or in a school campus. But if you can do that, you have really created a religious school, a religious place, which was what Krishnaji wanted, but not so easy to do.
Sir Kaustubh is pointing to perhaps a egoless state. He is asking, is life all about living peacefully, or is there something beyond that?
Well, find out. First come upon peace, then ask the question. You're knocking at a door at which you are not standing. If you are standing at the door and it's open, you will see for yourself. You want a promise that I will knock on the door and come there only if the vision beyond that is going to be thrilling. So you want somebody to tell you that. Sorry, I'm not that person.
Sir, another comment about selflessness. Russell is saying, wouldn't a selfless career be one that looks at what would be good for humanity instead of what the eye finds pleasure in?
Yes, that is what right action is. There is a chapter in my book called What is Right Action? We don't have the time to go into it. So you please read it if you've got the book. Otherwise, perhaps it would be there on my website also. And there I say that right action is that which is concerned with what is right for the whole, not just for you. When you are thinking in terms of what is good for you, that is self-interest. But when you are thinking what is the right thing to do for the whole, then that's a different question. That is what you are saying, not whether my view is right or your view is right. What is the right view? What is the right action? You're positing it as the unknown and using your intelligence and wisdom, whatever you have, to take a decision about it. You can only take a decision with the wisdom which you have. You don't have Krishnamurti's wisdom. So you can't take the decision on his behalf. You can only take with the wisdom that you have, with the understanding that you have. But your understanding doesn't have to be static. It can be growing if you are yourself living with a learning mind. That's it.
Another question by Sumitra ji is observation then only approach to learning about life?
Well, observation coupled with inquiry. We went into that the learning mind lives with questions. And needs to be sensitive. And if you are not sensitive, you have become sensitive from the childhood. That may be the first thing to discover, that what has made for the insensitivity, and to eliminate all the factors of insensitivity so that there is come back to sensitivity. And we went into that the ego, the ambition makes one extremely insensitive because one's attention is directed all in the direction of that achievement, and therefore you ignore everything else in life. And you define something as important and everything else becomes unimportant. All that is the ego process, and that blocks all learning. But we are promoting that. We are constantly saying, you must compete, you must do better than everybody else, and you must get the first prize in game and so on. We are all the time offering rewards so that the child does mathematics not because he enjoys mathematics, but because he wants a bicycle. You say, if you do mathematics and get 90% marks, we'll give you a bicycle. So you're blocking his joy in life by doing that. And it has entered into your international sports. If a man hits a six or something, they give him $100 or $1,000 if he makes a six. Sports has lost its value. It is no longer sports. It has become business. Earning money has become the important aim in sports. So not like that. When I was growing up as a small boy, I mean, Bradman and so on played cricket just for the love of it. They were not earning a living out of that. So you have to ask this deeper question. Why is it that anything that the human mind touches becomes so complex? Sex becomes such a complicated thing. It is not complicated for the plants or the animals, but it is tremendously complicated for human beings. Economy becomes such a complicated thing. Somebody invents with money, which was such a nice discovery. You didn't have to carry your goods to the market. You could write a piece of paper and say, I owe you so much and so on, and facilitate trade. But couple the ego with it, and it becomes all this interest rates and exchange rates and marketplace. And now nobody knows which way it is going to go. So it becomes a Frankenstein monster created by a simple invention called money, which was for the convenience of trade. So the deeper question to ask is, why does anything that human beings invent or discover become such a complicated thing? Einstein's equation E is equal to mc square becomes such a complicated thing. Nuclear bombs and nuclear power and all that. All that comes from the ego in our consciousness. So all complication, we have not remained simple. When you are egoistic, you are not simple. You are a very complicated human being. And then with complicated human being, you can't lead a simple life. You may talk about a simple life, it will never become a reality. It will remain a utopian concept.
So there are a couple of comments about different terms about the ego. What are the differences between the ego, the self, lower self, or higher self?
You know, unlike science, these terms have not been precisely defined. So you have to understand the context in which somebody is using them and the meaning with which he is using them. Different people use these terms with different meaning. I'll give you a few examples. In religious literature, you will find self with a capital S and self with a small s. Generally, the self with the capital S is just awareness. And the self with the small s is the ego. But in literature, you will also find mention of ego with a capital E. I myself also don't know what it is. You would have to investigate that, what they write about that, to know what is this ego with a capital E. So all these terms, they are used somewhat loosely. They are not precisely defined, and therefore it creates a lot of confusion. I can tell you what sense Krishnaji uses these terms. The self is the conditioning that you have. It is a factual thing. I mean, I know physics, I don't know biology. It's part of my brain. Similarly, my body has a form and my height is there and so on. It's part of factual part. So the knowledge is sitting there. Whatever I learned, that is what is there in my brain. I can't wipe it away. But if I use it to become proud of it, to think, build a reputation on it, and so on. All that creates the ego. So the attachment to the self creates the ego, the self being the structure which is there in your brain. There's nothing very important or unique about it. Everybody else also has a structure to his brain. Just as you have a structure to your body, your brain has a certain structure. But you use that to become proud and identify with it and do propaganda for it and so on. So this tendency to identify with something and blow it up in your consciousness as the me is the ego. So the ego is not the self in the, as I understand it, in Krishnaji's teaching. The self is the condition.
So next two comments or questions from Aditya and Sudeshna ji about is the ego different from me? If it is, then who am I other than the ego? Or why do I not see ego is just an illusion?
We don't see it because we have really not deeply inquired into this and committed ourselves to the search for truth. Otherwise, one should be able to see it. The other problem is that these words are used loosely. Even in different talks of Krishnamurti, you will find that he's using the words brain, mind, consciousness, truth, actuality, and so on, with somewhat different meanings in different talks. So you have to understand for yourself anyway, go behind. It is not important to analyze his words and try to pin it, if this is what he means and therefore that is the truth. That's the wrong way to approach truth. He himself said that. He was asked this question. And he said, sir, I will myself deliberately use different terms. Because anyway, when you define precisely, it doesn't give you the truth. So you will have to go behind the words and come upon the truth for yourself anyway. And therefore, it's not very important to be very precise in your definitions and expressions. In science, we wouldn't accept it without first defining the term. You can't talk at all in science. But that emphasis is not there in the religious quest. We all talk quite loosely about all these terms. So you have to, and in a way that's an advantage, because confusion is a good thing, because it means that you will investigate. But if you think you are very clear, be careful, because some of the greatest criminals were people who thought they were very clear. Hitler thought he was very clear. Mussolini thought he was very clear. People who were very sure of themselves and felt they were very clear were in deep illusion. So it's not important to ever have that opinion about what one thinks. Better to know that you are confused.
So T.S. Sharma ji is saying as far vision is important. He's talking about the long vision you mentioned. To realize the futility of the ego, please elucidate on this narrow vision and the far vision in our endeavors.
Yeah, I remember one dialogue which Krishnaji held in the Rajghat Study Center. I think it must have been 84, 85, towards the end of his life, where he talked about, sir, where does the self end and the other begin? That means how much space do you give to the self? Or does it occupy the whole field of your considerations? So he did not, in that dialogue at least, he did not disapprove of the self, because you do need the self to some extent to look after your body, to bathe it, to have the healthy food, and to take exercise and so on. So take decisions about all that, which is a responsibility towards your own body, not for self-expansion. That's not the ego. So that is the difference between need and greed. Greed is the ego, and need is not ego. That's why these things are very subtle, and one has to be very careful in forming opinions. I'm reminded of a dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna in the Gita, where Arjuna asks him, what is this liberated man like? How does he sleep? How does he walk? How does he work? Tell me. And Krishna gives a long reply, which you can read in the Gita. But the gist of it is, he works, he sleeps like the ordinary man. He works like the ordinary man. But it's not the same thing because he doesn't do it for the same reasons. That means he's saying it is at the motive level that his motive is not one of self-interest. That's the difference between the liberated man and the ordinary man. The ordinary man does everything with self-interest, almost everything. Some places where our self-interest is not very active are in our hobbies. There we just play for the fun of it, or do our garden or something, and we don't attach much importance to it, and the ego is not there in that activity. So we are capable of activity free from the ego, but we give importance to the egoistic one because all our ambition, our aims, achievements lie in that direction.
Sir, Tagi and Mona is asking, is there such a thing as healthy ego? I think you already commented on that. And a related question, and if not, is death of the ego essential in the process of inquiry?
Supposing I say yes, how will you die to the ego? So it has no value and opinion about this. You have to look at the whole thing. The entire discussion of what is the structure in your brain, and is the ego that structure, or is the ego something that you create in relation to your body, in relation to your mind? So we have discussed all that, so I don't need to repeat that. The ego is in our approach. See, sir, even if you experience a negative emotion, let's say jealousy, you're experiencing jealousy. Do you approach that egoistically? If you approach that egoistically, you will try to suppress. You will try to pretend that you are not jealous because you're worried about your reputation, what other people will think if you were jealous and so on. So there is fear, all this. But if you're non-egoistic, you approach it with a learning mind. The learning mind is non-egoistic. It says, Krishna, where did this feeling of jealousy come from in you? And there is some illusion somewhere in your mind from which this arises. Find out what that is. So it becomes a learning process, not an achievement process. So everything, including negative emotions arising in your mind, have to be approached without the ego, with a learning mind. The learning mind is not an egoistic mind. The achieving mind and the knowing mind are egoistic minds.
Sabu Simon has this comment, is there any ego or self in choiceless awareness?
No, there is no choiceless awareness if you are egoistic. So it's only possible to be choicelessly aware when the ego is not interfering. I don't know whether that means that you have to be totally free from the ego, or in that particular activity, the ego doesn't interfere. I just explained that in our hobbies and so on, where we do things just for the fun of it, there is not too much of ego entering into the activity. So we are capable of approaching non-egoistically, and we are also capable of approaching egoistically.
So Shakti Kumarji had a related comment that aren't ego and intellect intermingled?
No, intellect is the ability to reason, to analyze, to explain, all that. It has a certain function. Just because you are using the intellect, like I'm using the intellect right now to convey meaning to you, it becomes egoistic if I'm trying to impress you. If I'm seeking that some kind of advantage out of this talk so that you become my disciples or this or that, something, if I have such a motive, then it becomes egoistic. But if I'm just sharing with you my ideas, my thoughts as a friend, where is the ego in it? There is no ego. But you need to watch that. If disappointment, frustration, insult and all this begin to happen in that activity, you can be sure that you are approaching it egoistically.
We are coming towards the end of the questions from participants. If you have more questions, please ask. One comment from Kanchanji sir. She's stating that you have quoted Ravi Ravindra saying bridge can be built from here to there. Please explain.
No, the other way. Bridge cannot be built from here to there, there being the liberated state. But the bridge can be built from the other shore to this shore, the other shore which is free from the ego. Because with the ego, if you are approaching, you can't get anywhere. You will remain with the ego. But if you are not approaching egoistically, you are approaching from the other shore. And if you can be very careful so that the ego doesn't enter into your inquiry, then you may be able to build from there to here. That means apply that state to your daily life here and take decisions like that. You know, it's not really, it sounds very philosophic when we discuss like this, but I like to take examples which make things clearer. See, I was the principal of the Krishnamurti school in Varanasi. Now, it's my responsibility to take decisions which are in the interests of the kind of education which would go in the direction of the vision, and also keeping in mind all the people involved with that decision, what I feel. I have to use my wisdom, my understanding, everything to take a decision. That decision may happen to be wrong. Then I learn from the mistake and I move on, not cry over it and so on. No paschatap business, no shame. You learn from that. You learn from an error or a mistake. But if you approach it egoistically from the beginning, you are only considering what is good for you, then there is corruption, which is what our political leaders and so on are often doing. They're building their own house, their own reputation, their voting strategy, and whatever will benefit them. They are not really concerned with what is right for the country. So then it becomes a corrupt thing. So ego is corruption. So I am in charge of the school. I don't own the school. I can't use that school for my own purposes. It's my responsibility to look after the school. Come closer. My family. Is it my family in the sense that I can exploit them, I can use them to further myself? Or it's a responsibility I have taken on. I must care for them. I must respect them. I must be friends with them and help them. That's a non-egoistic approach to the family. Come still closer. My own body. Do I own this body? Did I buy this body in the market? No, it belongs to nature. And nature has given me a consciousness whose role it is to care for this body, to look after this body, not own it and use it to further my own pleasures and fulfill my own desires. It's a wrong use of your body when you are doing that. So when you take drugs, when you smoke, you take alcohol too much and so on, you are damaging the body because of you want to fulfillment of your pleasures. That's a wrong relationship with your body. It's not yours. Your body is not your body. So it depends on you how you approach. You need not approach it possessively. Possessiveness is part of the ego. You don't possess your children. You don't possess your wife. You don't possess your body. That's it. So Krishnaji talked of himself as a third person. K, he said. The speaker, he said. He never said I. He didn't identify with his body and his mind and thought. He even said, it's not my teaching. I have not thought it out, and so on. So we have to learn from all that. It goes all the way. You relate differently. You can relate with everything egoistically. Then it will produce conflict. It will produce division, including your body. And you can relate with it non-egoistically with a learning mind. Then it won't produce any of those negative emotions. And you will learn. So I'll end it here. Everything can be done egoistically. The same thing can be done non-egoistically. The ego is not in the doing or not doing. It's in the motive, in your approach.
Thank you, sir. So along same lines, the next question is, does purification of motive happen with consistent investigation?
I hope so, because if you keep investigating with an open mind, you will discover what is dangerous and what is not dangerous, what is healthy. But if you just accept it as an idea from your guru or some book, then that's not the same thing. You're trying to practice virtue, which is an impossibility. Virtue is a state of being, a state of consciousness. So don't concern yourself with achieving through effort, but keep understanding life and your consciousness wherever that takes you.
So there are two more questions.
Yeah, these are not Krishnaji's words. Huh? This is what I am saying.
Yes, sir. So Rajiv Ranjanji has a comment about religion. He's saying saints like Guru Nanak Kabir suggested Nama Japa, which is a form of chanting for English speaking people, as part of individual religious life. It appears that K does not approve of it. Am I right?
No, K never approved or disapproved of any action or activity. If you are doing it with love, if you are doing it without non-egoistically, if there is no illusion associated with it, it's fine. If it is associated with all kinds of illusion and it is being done egoistically, thinking that I am improving by doing this and so on, self-interest, then it becomes an ego activity and it is useless. He himself used to do chanting, Bharat Samaj Puja and all that he used to do. But his whole approach was that you have to be responsible to see that you deserve to do that activity. You know, when in Rockwood, they made the study center, he insisted that there should be a silent room. So Scott Forbes, who was in charge of Rockwood at that time, asked him, sir, what is this silent room? Will it bring silence to our mind if we sit there? He said, no, you take silence to the room. So the responsibility in Krishnamurti is always on you. Not that the activity will do something to me. You are approaching that activity wrongly. You are approaching it egoistically. Similarly, for the study center, he said, when Scott asked him, sir, we have made this beautiful building, but how shall we attract people to come to this retreat? And he said, you create the honey and the bees will come. If you have to invite the bees, something is wrong. In his life, you can see that. He created the honey and the people came like bees attracted to him, to his lecture. He never invited them to come. They came. So he was saying it's entirely your responsibility. If you're creating a study center, your mind must be religious. People must feel that in coming there, they have a better chance to come upon the truth. Then they will come. And if it is not so, it becomes just an intellectual debate and so on, then they won't come. And that's it. So it depends entirely on whether there is a religious mind in that place. So his teaching was, a place is religious when the mind there is religious. Not because Kabir lived there or Buddha lived there or Jesus Christ lived there. That's all old history gone. What is the mind there today? If it is in quest of truth, living holistically and so on, then it's a learning mind, then it's a religious place. Otherwise, not a religious place just because Krishnamurti used to live here. No. So it's
And
all
next
the
week,
responsibility on oneself. That's what it means. You have to be a light unto yourself.
so in next few minutes, this may be the last question. Aditya ji is asking, sir, you are investigating Krishna ji's teachings for so long. Have you come upon something?
I hope so. I don't know what total freedom is or liberation is, and I don't make that into an aim of this inquiry. But you come upon the understanding which you really come upon, and if you don't, then it's your own doing. You suffer for that. You will have all those conflicts and ambition and frustration and all that. So you can watch your own consciousness, and if it doesn't have any of those, then it means you have understood something. If all those things are still happening in your consciousness, it's telling you that you haven't learned yet. Go ahead, learn. That's all.
Thank you, sir. So this is probably the end of session. We don't have any more questions. I would just like to mention that we are coming close to the end of the series. We have two more sessions to go that are scheduled. And the session 12 is the one that we are considering to have just for the question and answers as mentioned in the beginning. So there is a feedback form linked in the emails. You may give us a feedback how your experience was. And so next we meet for session number 10, which is tomorrow. And we talk about, can there be a relationship without conflict? So see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.